Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another episode of Your Heels on the Ground with Ellen Mitchell. Ellen Mitchell is joined by Samantha Fitzgerald. I'm Bruce Silverman. Samantha is a probate attorney. And Ellen, why don't you do the introduction on Samantha, because you did such an incredible job on the first episode that we did with Samantha.
Thank you. Samantha Fitzgerald is a probate attorney in Broward County, although she works all over the state, Dade, Broward, and anywhere in the state of Florida. I work with a lot of different probate attorneys and estate planning attorneys, and Samantha is the person that I chose to work with personally. I've known her for over a decade. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she has a great team around her. So they really are able to handle everything with the team approach, and I could not be happier. Thank you for being here today, Samantha.
Thank you for having me, Ellen, and for those beautiful, kind words.
Once again, Samantha, just rack it, put it on a website, put it on a business card. Just let Ellen do your marketing for you. Let's start with a topic that we were teasing when we finished the previous episode. How can I sell a house during the probate process? Samantha, will let you start from the legal perspective.
Okay, so this will depend on a few factors. Number one, is there a will that gives the personal representative, which is what we call an executor in Florida, is there a will which gives the personal representative the power to sell? If they have the power in a will, they can usually sell without any court approval. However, there are some caveats to that. Some courts like to make up their own rules, which is one reason why we don't want to be in court to begin with. But if we find ourselves in court, then we have to follow the local rules or the judge's specific rules. And in some counties, they like to restrict the powers of the personal representative. Also, if the property was the primary residence of the decedent, so it's their homestead property, then there's lots of special rules that are going to apply to that, because technically homestead is not a probate asset. But there's this kind of period of time until the court will sign an order, enter an order declaring the property to be homestead. So you have this weird period of time that we know it's homestead, but the court hasn't actually declared it to be homestead yet. When the property is homestead, because legally title has vested in the heirs who are rightfully entitled to the homestead property, then you have to get deeds from all of those people, and you're going to have to get consents from them. So it kind of depends on the circumstances of the case and what court you're in and which judge that you're in front of and whether there's a will or not a will. But the property can absolutely be sold during the probate process.
Ellen, Samantha just brought up a concept, homestead. And for those people that are not familiar with homestead and what it means, why don't you take this one from the real estate perspective?
I would rather punt that one back to Samantha, because homestead and probate can be looked at differently than the homestead, the way that we typically think of it. So
yes,
it's not the.
Samantha, before you answer this, one of the things I want to point out about Ellen, which I think is very significant. There are a lot of professionals, a lot of individuals, a lot of realtors that when presented with a question that they may not be the most qualified to answer, they'll still take the answer and they'll still provide it. And for Ellen to go and, as she said, punt it back to you, says a lot about Ellen and her professionalism and her ethics in her profession, that she wanted to make sure that this was an answer that was provided by an attorney.
Absolutely. Ellen is the utmost professional. Homestead is super, super tricky. There are actually 3 different sets of homestead rules. Lots of lawyers don't understand homestead. It is a very complex legal topic. So what most people think of as homestead is when you get your real estate tax exemption on your property. That is similar to the homestead concept in probate, but it's not exactly the same.
Okay.
So when we're dealing with homestead, we're looking at something that was somebody's primary residence, but that has restrictions on what we call descent and devise. So there are restrictions on who you can leave your homestead to, and there are restrictions on how it passes. There are restrictions if you are married, for instance. There's lots of tricky things that can happen with the homestead property that you have to be really careful with. So Ellen is really smart to punt that, back to the attorney, because there can be so many problems. And what will happen is you'll be at the closing. So you'll, go all the way up until the closing. And then when they're reviewing title, which happens very close to the closing, that's when you'll realize, oh, we can't close. You don't have authority, or you need somebody else's consent, or, a host of issues potentially. So it's really, really tricky, and it's important to get a handle on the character of the property, before you get too far down the road. One quick example is your homestead property. You cannot leave it to anybody other than your spouse. And if you have a minor child, you can't devise it to anybody. And the default is, let's say you own a property and you're married and you have children together. This is your marital unit and you had children together, but only one spouse is on title, which is a very common occurrence if somebody owned a property and then later they get married and they moved into this property and they live there and they have children, they have a family, and they have a life together. And then that property owner dies. It does not pass to your spouse 100%. Your spouse gets a life estate in the property with the remainder to all the children. So that might be the children from your marriage. It might also include some children outside of the marriage. It's a very unexpected outcome. So homestead is very, very tricky and different from the real estate tax exemption.
You can
I
see
mean,
punted that.
I was going to say that I really thought when you brought up the word homestead that you were talking about, hey, you get $25,000 or a $50,000 deduction on your property taxes, not thinking that homestead in this situation had the complexity that it does. I'm going to stay with the sports analogy that Ellen brought up. Here's a toss-up question. Why use a probate realtor? What would be the difference between using someone that specializes in probate like Ellen and just using your friend or neighbor who is a realtor? So that's a toss-up question, meaning either one of you can go first.
I would like to give a quick story, and then I will pass it over to Ellen so she can, give her perspective. But we have a probate case right now that we actually tried to refer Ellen to, but our client has a friend who's a realtor and they wanted to use this person. Well, this person cannot grasp why we have to get a court order to sell the property and why we have to get consent from the other beneficiary. And can't we just close on the property? And she's actually instructing my client to do things that legally she cannot do.
Which only makes your job more difficult.
Yeah. And it's a good thing that we have a good relationship with the client and that she trusts what we're saying to her. Because some, people tend to want to hear the easy solution. And we oftentimes don't have that for them. We have the right or legal solution. So we were, glad that our client was listening to us, but, the realtor was making it much more difficult. And she was making my client nervous with the things that she was telling her because the realtor didn't understand the process. And the realtor was afraid of court. And the realtor was afraid of what the process was going to be and how long it was going to take and what was going to happen, because she just wasn't educated. So that was very problematic from our perspective.
That's not Ellen. So Ellen, your
Definitely
turn.
not.
Why hire a probate realtor?
Well, typically a probate realtor such as myself is going to have a team that they work with. In probate, there's so much more that often has to happen. And not just in probate, but in probate, in senior relocation, you have a property that's going to become vacant. Most of the time, or oftentimes, the heirs are out of state. You have a condominium full of furniture. What do they do with the furniture? What do they do with the personal property? Who's going to come in and clean the unit? Who's going to change the locks? Who's going to clean out the refrigerator? Who's going to do the touch-ups? All of those things that nobody thinks about. And when you do this day in and day out, I have a trusted group of people that I know that do all of those things. So it's just a phone call away. I had a couple of weeks ago, for example, it wasn't a probate, but it was a senior relocation, meaning she was selling the home and going into an adult living facility. And I had said, the home has to be vacant and in broom swept condition, which is what our contract provides for on the day of closing. If you need any help, if you need a mover, if you need a donation, whatever you need, I'm here to help. Well, they didn't. And I always like to do the walkthrough the day before closing so that I'm aware of any last minute things that could come up. And we went to the walkthrough, and there were all kinds of personal property left at the home. The home was not clean. The buyer was there. They hit the roof. But I have a professional that I was able to pick up the phone and say, Mike, I need your help. I need this right away. And he was able to get a crew out there to remove all of the personal property and clean the property. Unfortunately, it cost the home seller more than if they had done it in a more timely manner, but it didn't delay closing. They didn't have to hold back any funds, and the buyer was happy and satisfied, and we were able to close on time. So that's just one example. And then what Samantha mentioned, there is specific language that has to go into the listing agreement if it is a probate property and go into the sales contract. And a lot of times, most of the time I'm representing the seller, and the buyer's agent will say, what does that mean? It's subject to probate court approval. Is it a problem? What's wrong with it? And because it's something that I deal with every day, I'm able to say, it's just a court process. It's more, now the word is eluding me, but perfunctory. You know, they're going to go through the process and get it done. If the buyer is looking at a 45-day closing and their lease will be up on day 46 and they're going to wind up homeless, this is probably not the property for them. They should be able to close, but we could always have a delay. So I would rather, educate the buyer up front than have a nightmare at the end. So just the ability to see around the corners and anticipate the things that are going to come up. I also wind up taking a lot of cars to CarMax to get evaluations for the clients that have cars to sell. I've returned more cable boxes in my life than I could count because you can't cancel the cable account until the box is returned. And so what are you going to do if you're in New York? So I'm like, oh, I'll take it. I'll drop it off to Comcast for you or whatever the provider is. So all of those little things add up being a lot of big things when it really impacts, the ability to close, the ability for the seller to close the accounts, and all of those things that people don't think about that have to be done.
Ellen, I would think that in addition to the training and the certification and the education that you've gone through to become a probate attorney, which is a very narrow niche in the real estate business, that this is, it's a labor of love for you, but it's also a showcase of your passion and compassion, your passion for real estate and your compassion for people.
I just want to, you said probate attorney when it came to me. So I just want to make sure. Yeah.
I meant probate realtor.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to, I'm definitely.
And then the same applies to Samantha to have passion and compassion at a time when both are really needed?
I mean, I love what I do and I love serving people. So I've been very fortunate that I have been able to have a career of over 25 years doing something that I absolutely love and helping people every single day that I've been able to make a reasonably good living at. And so to be able to walk people through what's a very difficult time. I mean, I lost my mother, lost my grandmother, great aunt and uncle, and it's tough. It's really, really difficult. You're going through all of the things that you have to do along with dealing with the estate. So being able, that's why my logo is your heels on the ground. I had a client who had said to me, "Well, you're like our boots on the ground. You take care of everything." And I said, "Well, thank you. I feel a little too feminine to be your boots on the ground, but I'll be your heels on the ground." And it just makes me feel very good to be able to walk people through a difficult time. And I can't take their grief away. I can't, take everything away. But if I can take some things off of their plate and make it a little bit easier, then that really feels good.
Let's wrap up the conversation in this episode with this question: who cannot serve as a personal representative? And that sounds to me like it's a legal question. So this one is just a straight pass to Samantha. See, all three topics, all about sports tonight.
Okay, so who cannot serve? Somebody who is a convicted felon cannot serve. And you'd be surprised, a lot of people have very old convictions from, way back in the day. And it's really important that the attorney flushes this out at the beginning. We had a case once we took over from another attorney. And so we kind of inherited the client. And we didn't ask the question because we assumed he wasn't a convicted felon because he was already in the process of getting appointed by the court. And the day we got him appointed, he happened to mention something about, just in passing, his background. And we said, "What? No, now we have to tell the court immediately, you can't serve and you have to, resign." So a convicted felon is unable to serve. Very important to ask that we just flat out ask the question right at the beginning. Non-relatives who are not Florida residents cannot serve. So this can be very tricky because somebody can prepare a will and nominate somebody as a personal representative in the will. And, you're not going to die, hopefully, for a while. So who knows where that person's going to be living at the time of your death. So that's when the determination is made. So if somebody was a Florida resident, but they are no longer a Florida resident, or if they're no longer a relative, and this is kind of a gray area, but if somebody was an in-law and they are no longer an in-law, then they're not eligible anymore.
Let me ask you a question about that. Is there a difference in the court's view if they're no longer a relative as an in-law, the difference between divorce and or death?
It's a
Or
great
not
question.
and or death, but I guess and or death.
Yeah.
Because to me, as a layperson, they could be viewed differently, but I'm obviously not sure how the courts view that.
Yeah, well, divorce is clear. You're no longer a relative. But I agree with you. And it is not a black and white rule at all. And my opinion as an attorney would be just because somebody died, they were married at the time of the death, they should still qualify. And there's no actual rule of law that gets into it that deep. It's going to be based upon the judge's decision. And I have actually seen with my own ears and eyes in the courtroom denying somebody to serve as personal representative because of a death. And they were an in-law and they lived out of state. And it was very sad in this particular case. The attorney was arguing there is no other person. We don't have anybody else that can serve as personal representative. And it was very, very unfortunate. So that's another reason why you don't want to be in court if you can avoid it, because you are at the mercy of the judge sometimes. And, even if they make a wrong decision that should be black and white, what is your recourse? You're going to appeal the decision to the appellate court. That's ridiculously expensive. So sometimes, even though the decision's wrong, you just have to live with it and then move on to plan B, which can be very challenging depending on the circumstances.
It seems to me that's just another reason to make sure that you take care of your affairs while you're living, and button them up as much as you can. And not only that, throughout the course of our 2 episodes together, you've also brought up scenarios where situations change and that people should be on top of their wills, estates, their estate planning, to make sure that if someone who is a personal representative passes, or if there's a divorce, or somebody moves, or some other scenario, that they get back in touch with their estate planning attorney and make the appropriate changes so that you avoid all of the different scenarios that we have kind of played out over the last 2 episodes.
Absolutely. Every few years, you should be at least thinking about your documents and what did you put in there. But one thing that I do want to point out is, please name alternate people in all of your estate planning documents. It's so common that we review someone's documents and they have 1 or maybe 2 people. So they have their spouse perhaps, and then 1 alternate. Well, people die and they get sick and they are in a position in life where they say, I just don't want to do it. I'm taking care of my parents. I have, my own health problems or something. So you want to have a few alternates named if you have, the people, of course. But it's really, really important, because as people kind of drop off from being available, you don't want to have a vacancy.
I think we've pretty much covered everything over the last 2 episodes that deal with the legal aspects of probate and probate real estate. And Ellen, I'm going to ask this question to wrap up. You have been in real estate since 1994. You've been a licensed realtor since 98. At what point did you decide you really wanted to specialize in probate? And was there a specific situation that made you say, I want to be the queen of this niche?
I've always worked with some probate, being just in South Florida, which is the #1 probate state in my time in business. But it was probably about 10 years ago. I really wanted to marry my ability to work with forms, documents, deadlines, all of the task-driven things that are so important in probate and guardianship, as well as working with people in the emotions of it. So I looked at my business and I realized that when I was working with probate, I was really doing both of those things. When I'm working with the attorneys, it's much more data-driven. I mean, of course, you have that personal relationship, but at the end of the day, no matter how much the attorney likes you, they want to know that you can perform. And so, to have that.
And Samantha kind of knows that about you.
Yeah. And then to be the resource, to be the person that can walk people through such a difficult time, and to have the resource of the plumber, the cleaner, the locksmith, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker,
I
all
knew
of
that was coming.
all of
Well
those-
played.
all
Well
of
played.
those people. So I would say probably the last 10 years, I've just gotten much more intentional about that. And it's just something that I really love doing. And I hope that shows.
I think it does. Like I said, it's compassion and passion. And both of you have that. And I've recognized that through both of our episodes and both of our discussions. So that will do it for another episode of Your Heels on the Ground with Ellen Mitchel. Ellen Mitchel, realtor, probate realtor extraordinaire, as well as Samantha Fitzgerald, who is a phenomenal probate attorney in her own right. I'm Bruce Silverman. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time for Your Heels on the Ground with Ellen Mitchell.
Thanks, Bruce and Ellen.
Thank you both.